Right, so you want to be a top-level policymaker or diplomat. Well, today we're diving into something that's super relevant for those UPSC goals.
Yes, cybersecurity.
It comes up pretty much everywhere.
Mains, prelims, you name it.
Exactly, so we're dissecting a recent editorial from The Hindu.
Oh, no.
Always a good source,
Mm,
especially for you UPSC folks. They always have smart analysis.
absolutely. And this isn't just theoretical knowledge, is it? We're talking about the real world stuff.
Yeah, the challenges India's facing as it goes digital.
Big time. I mean, the numbers are pretty insane. We're looking at potential global cybercrime costs of like $10.5 trillion by 2025.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's a lot, and India's right in the middle of it.
Right in the thick of it. And it's not even just about the numbers, right?
Hmm.
It's about understanding the nitty-gritty, the specific threats, and what they really mean.
Yeah, you can't just say cybercrime and leave it at that. You got to break it down.
Totally. And luckily, the Hindu editorial does a pretty good job at categorizing things,
Yeah.
laying it all out.
They highlight state-sponsored espionage, ransomware attacks, financial cybercrime, AI-driven misinformation. They even get into supply chain vulnerabilities and cyber terrorism.
All the scary stuff.
Oh, and IoT security risks, too. It paints a pretty comprehensive picture.
Yeah, and what's really good, especially for UPSC prep, is that they don't just list those threats. They
Right.
put them in context.
Yeah.
Real world stuff. Like, remember that report about Chinese actors in the Indian power grids back in 2021?
Oh, yeah.
Straight out of a spy movie?
Seriously, those examples are key for understanding what's at stake.
Big time.
It's not just about stealing data anymore. It's about messing with essential services, the economy, national security. That's the stuff UPSC examiners love to throw at you. The so what's behind the headlines.
Totally. And speaking of real world, that surge in UPI fraud
Is
cases,
that huge?
166% increase,
Crazy.
that's people losing their money.
It is.
Real people. So it's not just this abstract cybercrime thing, it's impacting the daily lives of Indians.
And it shows how fast things change in this area. Cybercriminals are always finding new ways to exploit stuff.
For sure, especially as technologies like UPI get more popular, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got this big picture of cyber threats. Let's zoom in a bit on some that are especially important for UPSC, like state-sponsored espionage.
Classic.
Always a hot topic. The Hindu gets into how countries like China and Pakistan are using advanced persistent threats, APTs, they call them.
Ah, yeah. APTs. This is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
They're not your average cyber attacks. They're way more sophisticated, often targeting specific people or organizations to get data or cause disruption.
Long-term stuff.
Exactly. And they're sneaky, really persistent, really hard to detect.
So it's not just about having a firewall, you got to understand the whole picture.
You got to understand the tactics, the motivations behind these nation-state actors.
Cyber warfare, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And the editorial even mentions how India relying on foreign technology could actually make it more vulnerable to these APT attacks.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, if you're using software or hardware from another country, there's always that risk of built-in vulnerabilities or backdoors that they could use against you.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
So that dependence on foreign tech is something policymakers in India are worried about, right?
definitely. And it's something you should be ready to discuss in your UPSC exams for sure.
Okay, so APTs are pretty scary, but then there's ransomware. The Hindu brings up the AIM's Delhi server compromise.
Oh, yeah.
Chilling.
A whole hospital system locked down, patient data held hostage. Terrifying stuff.
Imagine. And what makes it even tougher is that they use cryptocurrency for the ransoms, right?
Yeah, almost untraceable, which emboldens the attackers.
So it's not just about the technology then, it's about the financial systems behind it all.
Right. It all ties together. That's what makes cybersecurity so fascinating.
For sure. It's this whole web of technology, crime, finance, international relations.
It's complex.
Okay, before we get too lost in the web, let's talk AI-driven misinformation. Like that thing with a deepfake video of Rashmika Mandana.
Yeah.
It looked so real. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Totally, and a little unsettling, right?
Yeah, and it's not just celebrities who are at risk here. Anyone's image, anyone's voice can be manipulated with this tech.
Mhm.
You can create fake evidence, propaganda, sow discord. It's a
Yeah.
lot.
Huge potential for social unrest, election interference, eroding trust in institutions.
And the editorial mentions that India is super vulnerable to this kind of information warfare, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a huge population, all sorts of media, the internet's growing fast.
It's a breeding ground for misinformation.
For sure. And when you think about a democracy,
Yeah. How do you protect free speech while stopping these harmful lies from spreading? How do you teach people to be smarter about what they believe? Big questions.
Big questions for policymakers and for, well, UPSC aspirants, right?
Absolutely. You got to be ready to tackle this stuff. Feels like every time you deal with one threat, another one pops up, right?
Yeah, kinda. But the Hindu editorial, it doesn't just focus on the bad stuff. It actually talks about solutions, like what the private sector can do to help with cybersecurity in India.
Yeah, they can play a big role.
Okay, so now we're moving from threats to solutions. But I gotta say, I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, I get it.
I mean, we hear about all those big data breaches at those huge tech companies all the time.
Right.
So can we really trust the private sector to be the good guys here?
It's a good question, and the editorial actually addresses it. They know there's skepticism about the private sector and cybersecurity,
Yeah.
but they've got the skills, the money, and the ability to innovate. They can make a difference. We just got to make sure their efforts actually help the country, you know?
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we do that? What can they actually do to improve cybersecurity in India? What are the concrete steps?
Well, one big thing is investing in developing solutions here in India.
Okay.
Homegrown stuff, like we talked about, relying on technology from other countries can be risky. We need Indian companies making software and hardware that works for India.
I see. Building a system that actually fits our context,
Mm,
not just importing whatever's out there.
exactly.
But how do you get private companies to actually prioritize that?
That's where the government comes in. Policies, incentives, that kind of thing.
Okay.
The editorial talks about the partnership between C3I Hub at IIT Kanpur and Tata Advanced Systems as a good example. It's that collaboration between universities, private companies, and the government. That's what we need more of.
Sounds like that collaboration is key.
It is.
But beyond just making new technology, what else can private companies do?
Sharing threat intelligence is a big one.
Okay.
Private companies often have the latest data on attacks and vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
But there's no system right now for them to share that with government agencies.
So we need everyone working together, sharing information to stay ahead.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that be a problem for data privacy and stuff?
Yeah.
Companies might not want to share sensitive information.
You're right, and that's something we have to address. But we can do things like anonymizing data, creating secure platforms for sharing. The editorial even suggests setting up a national cyber threat intelligence exchange.
Okay, so like a central place where everyone can contribute and everyone benefits.
Right.
But even with better information sharing, you still need people who can understand it.
Absolutely.
The editorial talked about a big skills gap in India's cybersecurity workforce.
It's a huge issue. We're talking almost 40,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs just in 2023.
Wow.
And that number is just going to keep growing.
Yeah, so it's not just about building firewalls, it's about training people. And that's another area where the private sector can help, right?
Totally. Partnering with universities, offering training programs, apprenticeships, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not even just about technical skills. It's about creating a culture of cybersecurity within companies.
Yeah.
Training employees to spot phishing attacks, to use strong passwords, report anything suspicious.
Little things can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's not just about tech then. It's about people and processes, everyone working together.
Right. It's about making cybersecurity everyone's responsibility.
Got it.
Yeah.
But realistically, there are going to be challenges, right?
Parts.
The editorial mentions a few that are important for UPSC folks to know.
For sure. One of the biggest is that we don't have clear rules and regulations. We have policies like the National Cybersecurity Strategy, but no one's really implementing them.
So no clear guidelines, no incentives, no one's really accountable.
Right. And that makes it really hard to get everyone working together.
Yeah, it's like the private sector needs the government to tell them what to do, but the government needs the private sector's expertise to make good policies.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of cost.
Right?
Cybersecurity can be expensive, especially for smaller companies. All the fancy security systems need constant updates.
Yeah.
That's tough for companies that don't have a lot of money.
So it's not just about wanting to collaborate, it's got to be financially possible too. What other challenges does the editorial talk about?
Well, even when companies want to share information, there are still practical issues.
Like what?
Like, we need a secure platform for sharing threat intelligence.
Yeah, something that protects sensitive data
Right.
so everyone feels comfortable sharing.
Exactly.
But beyond these specific challenges, there's the whole issue of depending on other countries for cybersecurity
Oh,
solutions.
yeah, that's a big one. The editorial points out it's often cheaper and easier to just buy software from foreign companies.
Makes sense.
But that creates risks for India.
How so?
If too much of our important infrastructure relies on technology from other countries, we become vulnerable
Vulnerable to what?
to pressure, to manipulation. It's a tough balance,
Mm.
saving money versus keeping the country safe.
So how do we find that balance? How do we overcome all these challenges and make public-private partnerships actually work for cybersecurity?
Well, the good news is the Hindu editorial doesn't just point out the problems, it actually offers solutions. They really do. And some of them are pretty smart. Like, they suggest creating a national cybersecurity council.
Okay.
Not just another government agency, though, but like a real powerhouse.
Gotcha.
And a key part of that is having strong representation from the private sector.
Oh, I see. So instead of having all these cybersecurity efforts all over the place in different ministries,
Right,
they
exactly.
would all be centralized, making policies, sharing info, responding to incidents.
Exactly. A one-stop shop for cybersecurity. It could really change things, you know? And it might even help get those existing policies, like the National Cybersecurity Strategy, actually up and running.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Now, what about that secure platform for threat intelligence sharing that we talked about?
Oh, they totally address that. They propose setting up a national cyber threat intelligence exchange.
Okay, so like a secure hub where government agencies and private companies can share data on threats in real time.
It's
I like it. It would allow for a much more proactive threat detection. But what about the cost issue? We talked about how cybersecurity can be a real financial burden, especially for smaller businesses.
Yeah, and the Hindus suggest tax incentives for companies that invest in cybersecurity,
Oh, interesting.
like tax credits or even subsidies for companies that adopt strong cybersecurity practices, especially if they're using homegrown solutions.
Smart. So it's kind of like aligning the government's interests with the private sector's.
Exactly. And suddenly, cybersecurity becomes a much better investment. They even suggest having a cybersecurity compliance index.
Okay, what's that?
It would categorize businesses based on how strong their security is.
So basically, transparency and clear benchmarks. That would encourage companies to improve their security,
Yeah.
right?
And it would help the government figure out who needs the most support. It's all about making sure everyone understands what's expected and has the resources to do it. But we got to remember, technology and policies are only part of the solution. You can't forget about the human element.
Yeah, that's right. Even with all the best tech and rules, people still make mistakes, and those mistakes can create vulnerabilities.
Right, and that's where the private sector comes in. They can do a lot to build a culture of cybersecurity within their own companies.
Yeah.
Regular training, phishing simulations, strong password policies, those kinds of things. It's about making everyone responsible for cybersecurity.
Right, making security a priority, not just something you think about after something bad happens. Now, when it comes to developing technology here in India, how can we make sure India is a leader in the field?
The government can definitely be a driving force here.
Right.
Investing in R&D, creating spaces for cybersecurity startups to grow, and offering incentives to companies that focus on homegrown solutions.
Like what kinds of incentives?
The editorial mentions a dedicated cybersecurity startup fund to help channel investment into this sector.
I like that. It's a clear signal that the government is serious about supporting innovation in this area. So we've covered a lot: the threats, the potential of public-private partnerships, the challenges, and some real solutions.
It's been a pretty comprehensive look at cybersecurity in India for sure.
It has. But this is just the start. Now it's about understanding the details.
That's where you come in, listeners. You're the future policymakers, the leaders who'll be dealing with all of this.
Imagine yourself in that interview room, confidently explaining how India can use its strengths to become a global leader in cybersecurity.
It's a powerful image.
Now, here's a little prelims question for you. Which of these is not a key cyber threat facing India? State-sponsored espionage, ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure, deepfakes, and AI-driven misinformation, or declining mobile phone usage? Think back to what we talked about. The answer should be pretty clear.
And for the mains exam, consider this. How can public-private partnerships be effectively leveraged to enhance India's cybersecurity infrastructure? Discuss the key challenges and potential solutions, drawing on relevant examples. You'll have to really think about everything we discussed, analyze how different groups work together, and propose real, actionable strategies.
We hope this deep dive's given you some good insights for your UPSC journey and helped you understand this complex but super important topic.
Cybersecurity in India is always changing, so stay informed.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into topics that matter.
Knowledge is power, and when it comes to cybersecurity, knowledge is the best defense we have.